The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's most advanced floating fortress, the seemingly untouchable symbol of U.S. naval power, weighing 100,000 tons and carrying 90 aircraft. It possesses an impenetrable defense system known as the Iron Grid of the ocean. But in the early hours of July 14, 2025, something unprecedented occurred. 120 hypersonic missiles were launched from the Chinese aircraft carrier, Shandong. Traveling at over Mach 8, they simultaneously converged on the Ford from three directions, with a single message: wipe out America's pride. In less than 200 seconds, the ambush sent shockwaves across the Pacific. The U.S. aircraft carrier was under direct attack. A historic defensive battle unfolded, and a stunning retaliatory strike left China reeling. Was this attack an impulsive act, or a meticulously crafted Chinese plan to overturn the U.S.'s status as the world's #1 military superpower? What you are about to read is the first time in the 21st century that an allegedly unbeatable aircraft carrier was attacked by a hypersonic storm. And the United States, as always, responded with unexpected fury. A hypersonic missile tears apart the dawn. 5:18 a.m., July 14, 2025. The sea south of the Mariana Islands was as still as glass. The sky was still dusky, with only the faint light of a new moon reflecting on the water. But beneath that calm surface, a force was moving, and in a matter of minutes, it would change everything. Over 250 nautical miles away, the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong unexpectedly began its maneuver. In the darkness, equipment kept concealed in the hangar for hundreds of days was activated, and in less than 90 seconds, 40 GJ-11 Sharp Sword combat drones launched into the sky. But they weren't carrying offensive weapons. Instead, they deployed an electronic jamming matrix, heat flares, and radar decoys. A thick smoke screen and false heat signatures created a blizzard of interference, disorienting every surveillance system. Just as the camouflage reached its peak, 120 DFZF Block 3 hypersonic missiles launches simultaneously from three directions the Shandong's deck. Its Type 055 escort destroyers, and a Type 093B submarine quietly lurking beneath the seabed east of Palau. Each missile, traveling at over Mach 8, carried a flexible maneuvering warhead capable of in-flight trajectory changes, and flew at three different altitudes. Some dove from 60,000 feet, while others skimmed the surface less than 6 meters above the water. The three waves converged into a lethal matrix. Surrounding the central target, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the U.S. Navy's floating superfortress. As the missiles left their launchers, the sea east of the Philippines lit up like daytime. U.S. low Earth orbit reconnaissance satellites detected the heat signatures just 18 seconds after launch, but it was already too late to intervene. At a distance of 200 nautical miles, the Ford and its escort group had less than 80 seconds to react. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Ford, Rear Admiral Rachel Dean, the first woman to command the U.S. Carrier Strike Group 5, stared at the radar screen. The red dots appeared as thick as a disturbed swarm of bees. "This density isn't a drill. They've gone live," she said, her voice dry. Before giving the order, "Activate Defensive Layer 1. Prioritize high-speed intercepts." In a matter of seconds, the entire ship became a living entity. Red lights flashed through the corridors, and alarms blared even in the crew's sleeping quarters. Radar officers worked with unprecedented speed. A simultaneous, multi-vector attack of this kind, integrating both electronic and physical warfare, had only ever existed in wargame simulations. The first missile was locked on by the Ford's SPY-6 radar at a distance of 127 kilometers. Its flight path was non-linear, changing its angle of attack 7 times in just 5 seconds. This forced the entire early warning system to switch to real-time automated analysis mode. Not long after, the sky west of the Ford seemed to be on fire. Hypersonic streaks tore through the air, shattering every concept of speed familiar to standard defensive systems. But the USS Ford was no ordinary warship. It was the culmination of nearly 20 years of research and over $13.5 billion in funding. And now was the time to prove why that number existed. On the starboard side, 2 missiles approached, one of which detonated just 90 meters from the hull. The shockwave threw auxiliary oil tanks overboard and caused the deck to list slightly for a few seconds. A low-flying drone, just 5 meters above the water, streaked toward the port side, but self-destructed in midair, raining debris onto the radar tower. No crew members were killed. Not a single command room was breached, but the message was loud and clear. We want to take you out of the game. This was no test. This was a meticulously planned preemptive strike with real technology, real firepower, and a real target. In 88 seconds, 120 missiles passed through the airspace between Micronesia and Guam, causing every U.S. station in the Western Pacific to go on its highest alert. On the internal network of the Pacific Command PACOM, a red line flashed continuously. Multi-vector hypersonic strike in progress. Targets CSG-5. Senior officers at the Pentagon were immediately awakened. An emergency meeting was held in the NORAD command bunker just 6 minutes after the first detection. But they all understood now was the time for the people on the warships. The USS Ford had exactly 18 seconds before the first wave of 120 death dealers hit the edge of its close-in defense perimeter. No one spoke. No one asked why. The only question, repeated in the minds of every officer, will we hold? And then, like a giant creature awakening, the Gerald R. Ford began to act. The giant fortress rises. The moment the first missile entered the 100-kilometer range, the USS Gerald R. Ford was no longer an aircraft carrier. It transformed into a complete, living war machine. Designed not just to carry planes, but to survive in hell. The entire integrated combat system was switched to full authority mode. The SPY-6 radar simultaneously locked on to 162 targets, moving at Mach 8, a feat that just a few years earlier was considered impossible. The command "Engage all targets" Fire Authority Level Alpha rang out, transmitted to every combat module. On the deck of the destroyer USS Preble, located 3.4 nautical miles south of the Ford, 16 SM-6 Dual-2 missiles were launched in pairs. They flew straight into the stratosphere, intercepting the DFZF swarm approaching from the southwest. A piercing shriek tore through the night, then vanished into a faint trail of fire, a light signaling that death was being broken high above. A brilliant blaze erupted in the sky, where 5 hypersonic warheads were torn apart in just 4 seconds. The explosions were inaudible to those on the ship, but the white flashes in the dark sky let every sailor know that they had just been saved, at least for the first volley. At closer range, the USS Ford's Mk-41 vertical launch system opened wide. 24 evolved Sea Sparrow Block II missiles were launched in clusters of 3. They were not offensive weapons, but immobile shield arrows programmed to meet the assassins from the horizon. Over the next 52 seconds, not a moment passed without at least one interception taking place in the air. The American missiles spiraled through space, hitting their targets with near-absolute accuracy. A DFZF was knocked out at an altitude of just 400 meters. Its debris plunged straight into the sea and exploded 212 meters from the Ford, creating a 25-meter wave that drenched radar tower number 3. But defense isn't just about long-range interception. When a hypersonic missile slipped past the first 2 layers of defense, the close-in weapon system CIWS was activated. The 2 6-barreled 20mm phalanx guns, installed on the Ford's port and stern, roared like metal dragons. In just 7 seconds, 850 armor-piercing rounds were fired from each gun, creating a steel curtain so dense that a low-flying drone couldn't get through. A Chinese GJ-11 drone, with low observable radar capability, had bypassed the interception layer, flying just 4.8 meters above the water. It streaked toward the Ford's deck from the northeast, where signal confusion remained after a nearby explosion. But the CIWS locked on to its final signal just 190 meters away. The volley of rounds hit the drone's tail, causing it to disintegrate in midair. Metal debris rained down onto the deck, with some pieces piercing the outer shell of the command tower. No casualties, no fires, no cries. Only one sailor wiped a spot of blood from his forehead from a shard of glass, then returned to his station. On the USS Curtis Wilbur, a destroyer positioned to the northwest, the experimental Helios laser system was used in real combat for the first time. A high-energy beam was aimed at a low-altitude DFZF missile, where all traditional interception methods were useless due to the short reaction time. The beam melted the missile's outer shell in 2.4 seconds, disabling its guidance system. The missile, out of control, plunged into the sea 2 kilometers away, leaving nothing but a white smoke trail. The waves crashing against the Ford's steel hull, the booms echoing from a few hundred meters away. All of it lasted a total of 3 minutes and 19 seconds. But in hypersonic warfare, that's an eternity. When the radar confirmed there were no more active targets, when the shrieking sounds had stopped, when the screens changed from red to a pale green, the officers finally dared to breathe. The entire USS Ford strike group had intercepted 118 out of the 120 incoming targets, an unprecedented feat in modern naval history. 2 missiles had slipped through the defense, but both detonated more than 80 meters from the ship, close enough to shake the armor plating, but not to penetrate it. On the deck, there were only a few scorch marks, 2 broken antennas, and a patch of radar that needed to be replaced. No casualties, no compartments breached, no disaster. In the command room, Admiral Dean stared at the screen for a long time in silence. Then she spoke, slowly but deliberately. "They threw their best at us, and we are still here." Just a few seconds later, a signal from Pentagon Command was transmitted. "Full authority to counterattack. Mission code Scythe." At 5:22 a.m., the sea grew calm again. But every eye on the USS Ford was already turned to the west, where the aircraft carrier Shandong was trying to retreat. And now it was America's turn to act. 5:28 a.m., the Pacific was quiet again, but it was the quiet of the sky after a storm. Still, damp, and full of electricity. In the control room of the USS Ford, a counterattack order was transmitted from the Pentagon mission code Scythe. The command was simple, brief, and urgent, and it authorized the USS Ford and its affiliated units to unleash their full offensive power. The enemy, who dared to fire 120 hypersonic missiles at America, would now pay the price. At that moment, at Andersen Air Force Base, Guam II B-21 Raiders were quietly being pushed onto the runway. The new generation stealth bombers, never before seen in a real airstrike, were equipped with anti-ship versions of the AGM-183 ARRW hypersonic missiles. Each carried 2, enough to incinerate a floating city. Under the protection of 2 EA-18G Growler aircraft from the USS Ford Group, the 2 B-21s climbed in an arc, avoiding traditional approach routes. Meanwhile, a team of MQ-28 Ghostbat drones, a joint US-Australian project, flew just 150 feet above the sea, approaching the waters between the Batanes Islands and the Luzon Strait, where the Shandong was moving to hide under coastal radar coverage. With their deep learning AI systems, the Ghostbats not only conducted reconnaissance, but also actively swept for jamming frequencies, adjusted the attack vector for the air units, and transmitted the final target coordinates back to the B-21s. No command post was intervened. No one spoke over the radio. Everything was in silence. 6:02 a.m. The 2 B-21s crossed the line of tactical range, the range that allows for an attack without refueling. The Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong, at this moment, was on high alert. 2 Type 055 destroyers were positioned to the east and south, their Type 346B radar systems trying to filter out the countless layers of interference created by the US. But in the electromagnetic chaos, one thing was missed: 2 tiny red crosshairs on the radar, speeding in at over Mach 7. By the time they realized it, it was already too late. 6:06 a.m. The first missile pierced the Shandong's forward deck, right where the J-15 hangar was located. The explosion created a chain reaction, blowing apart the deck and throwing the tied-down aircraft around. In less than 10 seconds, the entire flight deck was a sea of fire. The second missile targeted the rear of the deck, where ammunition and aviation fuel were stored. The explosion was unconventional. Instead of simply destroying, it created a secondary explosion in the auxiliary fuel depot, causing the ship to suddenly list 8 degrees to port. The entire ship lost power. The defensive systems crashed. The automatic firefighting system could not be activated. Thick black smoke billowed over the deck, while the crew panicked and scrambled to evacuate. The escort destroyer Hefe 117, which was in a shielding position, had debris pierce its radar dome. Losing command capability within 2 minutes, the flight control station was wiped out. Satellite signals from the Shandong were completely interrupted. No one on the mainland knew what had happened. In the sky, the Ghostbat drone silently observed, transmitting images to the Pentagon Command Center via high-bandwidth satellite. By 6:14 a.m., just 8 minutes after the first attack, Admiral Rachel Dean received confirmation from the Pacific Command the Shandong was combat ineffective in an uncontrolled retreat. China's largest aircraft carrier, the pride of its molten blue water strategy, had been crippled in less than 10 minutes. No images were released, no statement was made by the president, no press conference, no diplomatic reaction. Only one internal message was transmitted from the Pentagon. After everything was over, "We didn't start it, we ended it." In the USS Gerald R. Ford command room late that same night, the officers were still awake, rewriting the tactical log. But Rear Admiral Rachel Dean ordered no celebrations, nor did she allow anyone to be publicly commended. Instead, she wrote a single line in her personal notebook. The fortress held, the Challenger fell. The order was reshaped not by words, but by action. For American citizens, they may never have heard the roar of the CIWS, nor stood on a ship's deck in the middle of the Pacific, but after that day, they could sleep better. Because out there are people who don't wait to be attacked to react. They prepare beforehand. They are ready to respond precisely, silently, and decisively. Power doesn't need to shout when its mere presence is enough to make the opponent retreat. All of the above content is a simulation and a hypothetical strategic analysis. It is not intended to incite violence, political bias, or provoke military conflict or war. The content is for hypothetical simulation and analytical purposes only. Any misinterpretations will not be accepted. We are not responsible for any misunderstandings or applications of the content. Viewers should use their own judgment, verify information, and consume content selectively. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end. If you are passionate about military topics and enjoy analysis and creating hypothetical scenarios, please stay with our channel. If you found this video interesting, please click like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our daily updates. Now, you can watch some of our newest and most popular videos currently on the screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.